This is a reading from the Diary of Jesus by Jean Olagny. April 6th, AD 28, Thursday. At the crack of dawn, Jesus and his followers left for Bethlehem. They stopped at Rachel's tomb, and then Mary led the way to the cave where Jesus was born. She told everyone her marvelous memories of Jesus' birth. After resting, they pushed on to Jala, a few miles from Bethlehem. April 7th, Friday. The group headed for Beth Zur. Footnote 19. You may find Beth Zur spelled Bet-Zur or Beth Zur or Bet Sur. Editor. A town on their way to Hebron. Judas, who was seldom at peace, began to ask irritating questions once again. His companions became upset, but Jesus tirelessly sought to have him behave more like a son of God. Jesus and his disciples then scattered to look for Elijah the shepherd. He was in the area with other shepherds and their flocks. As they were looking for them, Jesus explained to Marcion that Herod's little martyrs in Bethlehem were in limbo with the patriarchs and the just. They would wait there until Jesus went back to open the gates of heaven. Then limbo would no longer exist, and the good would no longer need to go there on their way to heaven. Jesus predicted that this would be the case for Marcion. The group gathered at Solomon's Pool. These were 3 large, sheltered pools carved in rock. The apostles had found the shepherds and told Jesus they would all be in Beth-Sur in the evening. They ate and resumed their journey around 3 p.m. They were about halfway between Jala and Beth-Sur. They shared the road with other groups of pilgrims returning home from the Passover. At dusk, Jesus and his group saw the town, Beth-Sur, sitting on a hill. Elijah and the other shepherds were waiting for them. Now, a certain woman called Eliza lived in Beth-Sur. She was about 10 years older than Mary, and had been Mary's tutor at the temple. Elijah knew her, and said she had experienced many misfortunes. She was now despondent most of the time. Jesus and Mary went by themselves to see her. Jesus helped, but let Mary draw Eliza out of her despondency. Eliza had to be treated with kid gloves, though, and Mary spent the night with her. Jesus went elsewhere. April 8th, Saturday. Jesus and his disciples were the guests of Elijah and Joseph the shepherds. Then Jesus went to Eliza's house. The villagers gathered, surprised that Jesus had such a good influence on her. Jesus then asked the shepherds to become his disciples on a full-time basis. April 9th, Sunday. They all pushed on to Hebron, except for Mary and Simon the apostle, who remained at Eliza's. Simon was to lead Mary to Kerioth later on. On the way there, Judas started complaining again in a fit of jealousy. Jesus reminded him that he knew what he was doing. As usual, Judas calmed down as a result of Jesus' intervention, but only for a while. The group stopped to rest in a thicket near Hebron. The apostles and the shepherds talked about the immense task of evangelizing. Jesus comforted them by reminding them that mighty rivers that become as wide as the sea start off as trickles of water. Jesus entered Hebron, greeted the townsfolk, and healed some people. He talked about John the Baptist, since Hebron was his hometown. He also lashed out at the temple officials upon whom God's light did not shine. Then he healed a badly crippled man and retired for the night at the chief of the synagogue's residence. This man was eager to be forgiven for his previously scornful attitude towards Jesus on June 10th, AD 27. April 10th, Monday. Then Jesus and his group went to Yatta, where Isaac and Shepherd had suffered for 30 years. They were going to stay there for a few days. April 15th, Saturday. After this, Jesus and his group went to Kerioth, Judas's hometown. The town ceremoniously honored Jesus. Then they entered the synagogue. Jesus asked the reader to read from the 2nd book of Maccabees. This was the passage on Onias' trials, Jason's errors, and Menelaus' treachery and robberies, chapter 4. Jesus then said that for the first time he would not teach the people. Instead, he would let one of his apostles, Judas, preach in his hometown. In this way, Jesus inaugurated apostolic preaching. Jesus did give them a prophecy, though. This was concerning the time of the most horrible event in the history of mankind. The sun would be darkened, and people's hearts, groping around in darkness, could be led astray. He said, I do not want people to say Kerioth was Christ's enemy. The day is coming when a vile man will weave a plot to become the high priest. He will corrupt the powerful in Israel with his lies. Jesus told them the general context of his upcoming passion. Footnote 20. Jesus said all this in such a way that Judas never suspected he would be this evil man. Editor. After this, the chief of the synagogue invited Jesus and the apostles to his house. From April 16th, Sunday on, the apostles were scattered throughout the southern part of Judea to try out their preaching. They would be preaching for several days. May 2nd, Tuesday. In the last quarter of the moon of Ziv, Jesus was having a meal in Judas's beautiful house when Mary and Simon arrived. Meanwhile, Johanna of Chuza had taken over from Mary in keeping Eliza company. After the meal, Most Holy Mary and Mary, Judas's mother, talked about Judas. Judas's mother said she was very worried about her son. She knew how unstable and spoiled he was. She even admitted he was greedy, hard of heart, vicious, and proud. Mary consoled her. She said that the right thing to do was to pray for him. May 4th, Thursday. The whole group departed from Kerioth. In Beth-Zur, the women and the child were left behind, and the men headed west, going to the valley of Terebinth. Jesus gave his apostles encouragement, because they were very nervous about evangelizing. That night, they entered Beth-Ginna, not too far from there. Jesus healed the innkeeper's daughter. May 5th, Friday. They arrived at a plain on the way to Ashkelon. Footnote 21. Ashkelon used to be spelled Ashkelon, or even Assalon, with SHK or SC. Editor. They asked for food and shelter in a little village that evening, but they were driven away. They walked for a while and stopped, obeying the law's requirements for the Sabbath. There was a brook where they quenched their thirst. May 6th, Saturday. Just before sundown, it was still Sabbath, they arrived at an isolated house. Once again, they were turned down harshly. Despite this, Jesus exhorted his disciples to be charitable. Accept these sacrifices, he said, so that these souls may hunger for me. Then the disciples walked into a field of ripe wheat that had not yet been harvested. They were not desperately hungry, and may have done this partly out of spite. A group of surly Pharisees came by on the way back from the Sabbath offices. Matthew chapter 12, verse 1. At this time, Jesus was walking through the wheat fields on the Sabbath day, and his disciples, who were hungry, fell to plucking the ears of wheat and eating them. The Pharisees saw this and said to him, Look, your disciples are doing a thing which is not lawful to do on the Sabbath. He said to them, Have you never read of what David did when he and his followers were hungry? How he went into God's house and ate the loaves set out there before God, although neither he nor his followers nor anyone else except the priests had a right to eat them? Or again, have you not read in the law that the priests violate the Sabbath rest in the temple and none blames them? By the way, I said high priests. It's just priests, not high priests. Or again, have you not read in the law that the priests violate the Sabbath rest in the temple and none blames them? And I tell you, there is one standing here who is greater than the temple. If you had found out what the words mean, it is mercy, not sacrifice, that wins favor with me, Hosea chapter 6, verse 6, you would not have condemned the innocent. The Son of Man is Lord, even of the Sabbath. At that, Jesus turned away from the Pharisees and said to his apostles, Let us sleep in the sand dunes close by. God will provide some food for us. They walked off as night was falling. May 7th, Sunday. They got up at dawn and walked across the dunes towards the seashore. The wet sand made it easy to walk the last mile to Ashkelon. Jesus and his apostles went round the city walls, heading for the market gardener's district. An old Philistine named Ananias welcomed them. They took leave of him for the day and entered Ashkelon. Jesus continued to train his apostles. He sent them out in 4 groups, arranging to meet them at 3 p.m. He remained by himself and healed a very ill woman. When they met at 3 p.m., the apostles had various impressions, but overall were rather discouraged. Once again, Judas complained the most, but Jesus comforted them all. May 8th, Monday. After spending the night at Ananias' home, they went back inland, but further north this time on the way to Azotus. Jesus told his apostles to meet him near Azotus in the evening. He went by himself to Magdalgad, a little village on a hill. Then he turned a pagan idol to ashes, and performed a miracle on a woman who could not give birth. He thus saved both her and her child. He also saved a billy goat from a gory ritual, and it was given to him. That evening the apostles were even more disheartened than they were at Ashkelon. The way of the Lord is not an easy path. Jesus cheered them on and explained to them that this was the way to learn humility. May 9th, Tuesday. Jesus and the apostles headed north in the direction of Yavne. Footnote 22. Yavne has been spelled Jabne or Javne. Editor. While they walked, Jesus gave his apostles a glimpse of their destiny. He told Peter he was to go to a place bigger than Bethsaida, Nazareth, Magdala, and Tiberias put together. He also threw a handful of light pebbles into the air and compared his cousin James to the only one that landed on his hair, which represented Palestine. Jesus told them about the wealth of crowds who did not belong to Israel, the sea of humanity which was not Palestine. All these were eagerly waiting to yield their treasures to God's workers. He also explained to them that this trip in Philistine country was just a little foretaste of what lay ahead for them. Jesus was putting them through this now out of love and foresight to pave the way for their future missions. I taught you to say, "Give us today our daily bread." This request is for all men, those living today and those yet to be born, those who know God and those who do not know him, those who love him and those who do not. This is your ministry. You must pray for all. Immediately after this, they were in sight of Yavne. Jesus sent all his apostles there except for John. Jesus and John left with the goat for Ekron, which was about 9 miles away. There, Jesus had John join him in healing someone miraculously. May 13th, Saturday. Jesus and all his apostles met after sundown. Jesus learnt that Andrew and Philip had distinguished themselves in Yavne in the last 5 days. Matthew was not dissatisfied either. They walked in the moonlight and slept until daybreak. May 14th, Sunday. After visiting the Maccabees' tomb at Modim, they headed for the rugged mountains of Judea. In the evening, they stopped by a large spring at a rest point on the road to Jerusalem. Some merchants also stopped, as well as a wealthy wedding party carrying well-lined purses. Most of the people went to sleep, but Jesus prayed. He and a few others detected some robbers close by. He gave orders to awaken everyone and stir up the campfires. After this, Jesus walked to the bushes where the robbers were hiding. Jesus spoke to the robbers with his back to them so that all the others could also hear him. Jesus spoke about true and false riches. He said how paltry and useless it is to fight with God. He talked about love. He told the robbers that he did not hate them and was not afraid of them. His words totally disarmed the robbers. They repented. Having been protected, the merchants and the wedding party showered money and gifts on Jesus and the apostles. Someone also gave Jesus and the apostles a few ewes in exchange for the goat. Most importantly, however, everyone accepted Jesus' words. May 15th, Monday. As they went on their way, Jesus told his disciples once again that he was not a soothsayer. He could read everyone's heart unless the Father arranged things otherwise. He could easily know what everyone was thinking about, even when he was far. I want you to understand that if you are one with God, God himself will work through you. Love is the only force by which we can achieve this. He said, only the devil and his sons can resist love, not those who involuntarily sold themselves to the devil out of weakness. At this point, all understood what John had been carefully concealing from them. John had performed a miracle at Ekron. You will all go much further, Jesus added. They arrived at some lands belonging to Johanna of Chuza, near Beth-ur. There they saw Mary of Clopas and the child. Mary of Clopas and Salome ran over with Johanna and Margim in order to greet the travelers. Holy Mary was in the rose garden with Eliza, who had recovered from her depression. Jesus and his disciples spent the rest of the week at Johanna's house until the official date for Pentecost. May 19th, Friday. On the day before Pentecost, Jesus and his apostles arrived in Jerusalem. Margim was with them, but Judas was not. Since Judas was ill, he stayed at Johanna's with the women. May 20th, Saturday. John chapter 5, verse 2. Now there is a pool in Jerusalem at the sheep gate called in Hebrew Beth Zatha, with 5 porticos. Footnote 23. This pond was found in some digs on the northeast of the temple. Under these a great number of diseased folk used to die, the blind, the lame, the disabled. There was one man there who had been disabled for 38 years. Jesus saw him lying there and knew that he had waited a long time. He asked him, "Do you want to recover your strength?" "Sir," the cripple answered, "I have no one to let me down into the pool when the water is stirred, and while I'm on my way, someone else steps down before me." Jesus said to him, "Rise up, take up your bed and walk." And all at once the man recovered his strength and took up his bed and walked. That day it was the Sabbath, and the Jews said to the man who had been cured, "It is the Sabbath. It is not lawful for you to carry your bed." He answered them, "The man who gave me back my strength told me himself, 'Take up your bed and walk.'" So they asked him, "Who is this man who told you, 'Take up your bed and walk'?" The man who had been healed did not know who it was. Jesus had drawn aside from so crowded a place. But afterwards Jesus found him in the temple and said to him, "Behold, you have recovered your strength. Do not sin any more, for fear that something worse would happen to you." At this Jesus went back to his place and prayed. Meanwhile, John chapter 5, verse 15, the man went back and told the Jews that it was Jesus who had restored his strength. The Jews took occasion to rouse ill will against Jesus for doing such things on the Sabbath. And Jesus answered them, "My Father has never ceased working, and I too must be at work." This made the Jews more determined than ever to kill him, because he not only broke the Sabbath, but spoke of God as his own Father, thereby treating himself as equal to God. Jesus answered them as follows, "Believe me when I tell you this. The Son cannot do anything at his own pleasure. He can only do what he sees his Father doing. What the Father does is what the Son does in his turn. The Father loves the Son and shows him all that he himself does, and he has greater doings yet to show him for your astonishment. Just as the Father raises up the dead and gives them life, so the Son gives life to whomsoever he wills. So it is with judgment. The Father, instead of passing judgment on any man himself, has left all judgment to the Son, so that all may honor the Son just as they honor the Father. To deny reverence to the Son is to deny reverence to the Father who has sent him. Believe me when I tell you this. The man who listens to my words and puts his trust in him who sent me enjoys eternal life. He does not meet with rejection. He has passed over already from death to life. Believe me, the time is coming. Actually, it has already come, when the dead will listen to the voice of the Son of God, and those who listen to it will live. As the Father has life within him, so he has granted to the Son that he too should have life within himself. The Father has also granted the Son power to execute judgment, since he is the Son of Man. Do not be surprised at that. The time is coming when all those who are in their graves will hear his voice, and will come out of them. Those whose actions have been good will rise to new life, and those whose doings have been evil will rise to meet their sentence. I cannot do anything of my own authority. I decide as I am told to decide, and my decision is never unjust, because I am consulting the will of him who sent me, not my own. If I was the only one to testify in my own behalf, that testimony of mine would be worth nothing. But there is another who testifies to me, and I know well that the witness which he bears me is worthy of trust. By the way, you yourselves sent a message to John, and he testified to the truth. Not that I depend on human testimony, it is for your own salvation that I say this. He, after all, was the lamp lit to show you the way, and there was a time when you were willing enough to rejoice in his light. But the testimony I have is greater than John's. The task which my Father has given me to achieve, those very actions which I perform, bear me witness that it is the Father who has sent me. Yes, the Father who sent me has himself borne witness to me. You have always been deaf to his voice and blind to his manifestations. Moreover, you fail to continually keep his word in your hearts. That is why you will not trust one whom he has sent. You pore over the Scriptures, thinking to find eternal life in them, and indeed they bear witness to me. But you will not come to me to find life. I do not mean that I look for honor from men, but that I can see you have no love of God in your hearts. I have come in my Father's name, and you give me no welcome, although you will welcome some other if he comes in his own name. You are content to receive honor from one another. How can you come to believe? You have no ambition for the honor which comes from him who alone is God. How can you learn to believe? Do not suppose that it will be for me to accuse you before my Father. Your accusation will come from Moses, the very man in whom you put your trust. If you believed Moses, you would believe me. It was of me that he wrote. But if you do not believe in his writings, how will you believe in my words? After this, Jesus went away. He seemed to pay no attention to the temple officials' reaction or the crowd's silent approval.